Welcome to Forward Focus. My name's Tom Burdick. Today we're talking about growth and growth management, whether it's ruining our neighborhoods. Got a couple of guests today. First guest to my immediate left is Councilman Brian Derdowski, King County Council. And next to Brian is Bill Elder. And Bill is well, tell us what group you're with.
Well, I'm here today with the Washington Population Coalition. We're a group of people that are interested in population issues. I think we need to be addressing ways that we can reach equilibrium at both the statewide, local, and national level.
Well, Brian, you've had a ringside seat to growth issues for how many years?
Well, at least a dozen years, and even before that.
A dozen years as an activist, and then later as an elected county councilman. And the specifics of growth are numerous, to say the least. And rather than get lost in an awful lot of that technical detail discussion, which could take us hours, and maybe someday we'll have a chance to do that, let's talk about some of the underlying basis for growth and what makes people unhappy, what causes some of the unsettling feelings in the communities that we've got right now. I know every one of your elections has been a battleground over growth issues because you come from a very crowding intensive area, very high demand area. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the statewide issues, how this state is managing through the Growth Management Act. And let's start with you, Bill, a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, with the Growth Management Act, how these growth predictions get started, where they're coming from.
Great. One of the things that Brian Derdowski taught me early on is that this growth doesn't just happen, that it's the public policy really ends up driving it in a number of ways. And with the Growth Management Act, we aren't managing the rate of growth at all. It's just basically assuming past rates of growth will continue on into the future and arguing about whether we should put that growth in rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas, and how to minimize the impacts and get it paid for in terms of the infrastructure. And in interviews that I've done with state officials, it just has blown me away that we operate with projections that put our statewide growth at basically 1 million every 10 years. And the demographers and the economists, when you ask them what assumptions go into that, they say, well, number one, we assume that we're going to continue to draw population migration to the state.
Whether we need them or not?
Well, and that we're going to do so because we're going to draw faster than California does. And we're going to draw population faster than California does because we're going to maintain an attractive, quote, business climate, which means lower taxes, trying to compete to get businesses to move to the area.
So are you saying that there's an attitude where we're going to subsidize new growth with existing property taxes, sales taxes?
The attitude is in the Office of Finance and Management and the Department of Revenue, the more growth we get, the more money we've got coming into the state as revenue. And therefore, the more we can spend on the things that we want to spend on. And the tremendous fallacy in it that I just don't understand how they think this way is there's no accounting for the cost side of the equation. It's like a business that's saying, if we just get more revenue in here, if we do anything we can to maximize revenue, we're successful. Nobody's at the state level is looking at state requirements for infrastructure, let alone what Councilmember Derdowski has to grapple with. How is the county going to pay for all the infrastructure, the schools, the transportation facilities, etc., that are required by the population growth that these businesses drive.
So we're pulling these growth estimates, these future estimates. We're going to grow so much because we already did that last year in the last 10 years. So it's kind of a computer-driven model rather than a reality-based model.
And the assumption is that we want to continue growing at least past rates.
Well, Brian, it almost sounds like an alcoholic staggering down to the next tavern, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I had a few drinks at this one. I'll go find another one where I can get a few more drinks. Right. I mean, it really looks like, you know, the state is on some sort of a growth binge here. Is there another way to look at growth in terms of why our population expands?
Well, first of all, I believe that the public and the policymakers need to begin to believe and act as though growth is a choice, because it is a choice. The choice that's been made is to grow like mad and grow faster than California. Is this a choice that we voted on? When was the last time you were asked, how much do you want the state to grow? It doesn't work that way.
It's never been voted on.
No, what happens is that the current system is analogous to this. A green eye shade demographer walks into a room does some computer work, and comes out and hands you your future and says, this is what your community is going to be like because you've got to accept this growth. And then the public, who doesn't want to accept that growth, is forced into it. And this is absurd. In every other public policy debate that we have, you start out with what do the people want. And if you go to the people, and it doesn't matter whether you're in Ellensburg, or if you're in rural King County, or if you're in downtown Seattle, or if you're in Renton, what people want is moderation. They want moderate, reasonable growth over a long period of time.
Because the higher the degree of change, the higher the degree of resistance. I mean, that's just natural psychology, isn't it?
Well, the higher the impact is. You see, the trouble is that neighborhoods and communities can adapt to moderate increases in growth. If you grow too fast, then you get dislocations. You first of all, your infrastructure costs grow exponentially. In every community, there's a certain amount of reasonably priced infrastructure. If you grow faster than that reasonably priced infrastructure, then your costs escalate. There's a certain amount of aging housing stock. You don't build affordable housing, you age affordable housing. And if you grow faster than you are aging your housing stock, then the people in the lower income levels are the hardest hit by that rapid growth, which causes the lower income housing prices to rise faster than the higher income housing prices.
Would there be a good analogy in saying, well, you know, I want to build a new house, but doggone it, it's September, and I want to have that house done by October before winter gets here, so now I'm going to have to pay some overtime. I'm going to end up with the same house, same quality, but now I've got to pay overtime to my plumbers and my electricians and my roofers to finish that house. Is that kind of what we're doing in our own towns?
Well, that's part of it. That is bringing the growth on fast drives the costs up. In fact, the current rapid growth that this region is experiencing is already having an upward pressure on the construction costs. The RTA, the stadiums, the construction projects that are underway are putting a demand on the construction industry, so prices are starting to rise, so that the local school district that's wanting to put in a new school suddenly finds that the bids are 15% higher than they anticipated, and guess who's going to pay the bill?
The taxpayers?
And at the very time, as we are growing faster than our reasonable ability to provide infrastructure, is exactly the time that the development industry are running radio ads telling people that we've got to get rid of impact fees, and the impact fee is one of the only techniques that we have to moderate the effect, the rate of growth. But the point is that our futures, our neighborhood futures, our community futures should be dictated by our community standards. It should be driven by what we want.
Internally?
The kinds of housing, the kinds of communities that we want. And the amount of growth should be elastic to match the kind of community that we want. But it's the other way around. The developers, when they were arguing against the growth management law, they stuck a very dangerous concept into the law that said every government is forced to plan for 20 years worth of growth. That concept now has been distorted in every community in the state to this slavish adherence to that 20-year standard without regard to to the infrastructure, and without regard to whether that 20 years worth of growth occurs in the first 5 years or the first 10 years or the first 15 years. Evidence that what government does in its taxing policies, in its zoning policies, and in its infrastructure policies is what determines the growth rate, not some forecast. What we're doing throughout the state is we are turning forecasts into self-fulfilling prophecies.